Are you an adventurer looking to take your hunt to the next level? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to East Meets West Hunt with your host, Beau Martonik.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the East Meets West Hunt podcast, Mountain Buck Q&A edition, brought to you by Timber Ninja Outdoors. So the way this podcast works is it is in addition to the normal weekly episode of the podcast. And this is going to be hopefully short 10 to 20 minute episodes answering some of your questions that you've submitted and talking about these specific things in a quick bite-sized piece that you can listen to on your way to work, out to a hunting spot, whatever it is. So on these specific topics. Now, if you have some questions that you want to submit, please send it in to my email, beau@eastmeetswesthunt.com. And in the subject line, just put in Mountain Buck Q&A so I know what it's for, and I can pick and pull from them to be able to add into the podcast. Now, I will say that this is a special edition of the podcast, and it will be ending here shortly. As far as not doing it full all year, doing the 2 episodes per week, but during hunting season here, I wanted to make sure that we did this. If it does get enough traction and you like it, then maybe I will continue to do it a little bit more. But on this week's question of the week, there was multiple questions that came in about the second rut and when does that happen? Is it real? And when does that happen? So the second rut is the way it's defined is basically when fawns or does that did not get bred during the first primary rut that they come into estrus again. So the fawns are a month older at that time frame when the primary rut occurred, and they're able to have their first estrus cycle really in that beginning to mid-December time frame. And then that's going to depend on where you're at geographically. But at the same time, does who didn't get bred during the first estrus cycle in November, they come back in another 28 days later. So one of the thing about the does, I guess the fawns specifically that I learned, and this was through some video series that I watched from the National Deer Association, so NDA, that they had put out that was really good information about this. And areas that have really good nutrition and food for those fawns, they're able to mature enough and get to that point to where they're able to come into estrus during that year. And so that was something to note in areas that don't have a lot of good food, anything you might not see that as much. But the second rut is, from my experience, is not as active as the first rut and also has more pressure, hunting pressure that changes things. In December, you look at a place like Pennsylvania, we've already went through archery seasons, muzzleloader seasons, bear seasons, rifle deer seasons in the full swing of things at this point. Like, that's a lot of people that have been in the woods and kind of changing things up a little bit. And I do believe that the second rut is, is real. I mean, that's science. It's not really up for my opinion there, but it really depends on what I've found is areas that have a really good buck to doe ratio. So there's a good, essentially what would be perfect is 1-to-1, 1 buck for every doe. And if you were to have that scenario, you're probably not going to have so much of that second rut because every doe is getting bred during that first time period. Now, when you get to areas that have a lot more does than bucks, those bucks aren't able to breed all those does in that 24 to 36 hour window when they come into estrus that they have to be able to get bred. And so now when you're looking at it from that perspective, you kind of got to think about from your area, what does that look like? Is your buck to doe ratio out of whack? And is that something that you can take advantage of and be able to move in? And so like here's a couple examples that I have. I was going through some trail camera data while I was when I was getting ready for this podcast, and I have had one particular area from December 4th to December 9th that in the last 5 years has had some pretty dang good rut activity, which is during our gun season. Bucks chasing does, bucks searching, brand new bucks showing up to the area. And you may say, oh, that's just the hunting pressure pushing them into it. And I don't believe so. From having my cameras on video, I was able to hear bucks grunting as they're coming through right on the tail of some does, and then just seeking. And there's one particular buck that is an absolute giant that shows up every year in one of these areas and comes through only one day a year, and he comes through in daylight, middle of the day, cruising this ridge, looking for does. And so that was something that I really learned, and that area does have more deer than some of the other areas that I hunt, and quite a few more does. So thinking about that, and then when I started going down to West Virginia, that was another thing I noticed, where there's the area that I hunt, and the place that I hunt down there is a private lease, and it's a big chunk of mountain land. There's no ag or anything, but there's a lot of freaking does, and there's a lot of deer there. So in that area, from what I've learned and from the people down there that I've met, and Josh and all those guys, they're talking about how good December is, and they're breeding again. They're coming through. There's that secondary rut, and it's pretty strong because of that. Now, it's not good that that buck to doe ratio is out of whack that bad, but it does lead to more activity in that December time frame. So, and then really you can even see a third rut essentially with some of those fawns coming in, or if some of those does don't get bred, another 28 days after that, beginning of January in that time frame. For where we're at, I'm basing these time frames off of Pennsylvania, that they say the peak rut is November 15th. So that's how I'm kind of basing all of these things off of. So where I see one thing I wanted to talk about a little more is where I see most of the second rut activity. So it's kind of in the same places that you would see in the first rut, but not. Like, I feel as if at that point, with so much hunting pressure, that these does are holing up in different places, and even in the bucks, and these spots sometimes are just overlooked spots that are close to roads. Sometimes they're way back deep in some thick, choked out drainage that's full of laurel or beach brush or whatever it is. Wherever the pressure's not seems to be where a lot of those deer are holing up at, and that's where you're going to see the activity away from your traditional doe bedding areas that they dealt with when they weren't pressured as much, or had that amount of people in the woods back in the first rut time frame. So that's something that I've definitely noticed. So a lot of side hill action, some older clear cuts, some thick stuff that doesn't allow people to get tree stands in. That's where I've seen a lot of this activity, and my cameras light up over the last 10 years of running cameras. Now, that buck that I was talking about that comes through in that December 4th to 9th time frame, that's one specific deer that was doing that, but that whole entire area had more activity that was coming up during that specific time frame. And then I'll see it in other areas, just not as much, depending on, again, that population. And I really do believe that it comes a lot down to that, because those bucks in, say, like in West Virginia where I'm hunting, and that buck to doe ratio is kind of out of whack, those bucks, they don't have to work really that hard to find a doe that's coming into estrus at that point. So they'll be laid up with that doe for a while, and there's other ones that are coming in that just aren't getting hit at that time frame. So my thought, if you're going to try to take advantage of that secondary rut, and if it's in a time frame when there's a lot of pressure, is finding those holes where those deer want to be at. And again, that doesn't always mean it has to be way back in, far away from the roads. I've found it on some side hills all over the bank of some roads before, and then sometimes they're way back in. There was another area that I actually haven't ran a camera there since 2021 that I just had too many spots that I was monitoring. But this place is really good in that end of November, first week of December timeframe with some of that activity. And it was a place that was definitely a long ways in to be able to get to, and the area was hunted pretty heavily, but I never saw anybody on my cameras way back in this spot. Just a steep side hill, old logging roads going through, probably like a 25-year-old cut on that side hill. So, your pull stand trees, and those deer lived in there bumping does, and they honestly kind of stayed there throughout the late season, even in the January. So hopefully that's able to help you a little bit, because I've read so much on the second rut and heard about it and stuff in the past, and it's like, oh, as far as the applications to hunting farm country, but I wanted to give my thoughts and my experience on hunting it in the big woods areas without ag, and kind of how I think you can take advantage of it and be able to get out there. And if you're still holding on to a tag, maybe be able to fill it. So thanks everybody for listening. I really appreciate it. If you like this podcast, please share it with your friends, family, or anyone else that you think that you could help out with it. I really appreciate it. Give it a rating and review, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of East Meets West Hunt with your host, Beau Martonik. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit eastmeetswesthunt.com, Facebook at East Meets West Outdoors, and Instagram at East Meets West Hunt. If you enjoyed today's episode, please review and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.